This is Dr. Collins Harrell. I want to show you how to use the new Progressive Orthodontic app in Medit link and show you the basic functions. So here I have created a patient and I have attached STL files. So here's the STL files. Then we also have a Lateral Ceph. These are the things that are required to run all of the capabilities of the software. And then we also have uploaded some images. Okay, so I was able to do that by clicking on this attach button. So once those things are attached, you can go ahead and open the app. If you've already created a case, you can select that project, but we're going to click cancel so that we can create a new project. So I'm going to assign the data. You can either click and drag, or you can click the image and then click the arrow that puts it into the correct location. These are the three things: the maxillary mandibular STL file and the cephalometric X-ray is what is required to run all of the features. But we can also assign these other images, especially if you're going to use this to order aligners. You would want to include all of these images. So when we confirm that, it opens up this new case basically. This first page is to trim the data if there's any unnecessary data that was created when you were scanning. Usually there's nothing to do here, but for example, in this case, if I wanted to trim away some of this extra data, I use the tools that are here and just select and delete that data. Okay, but usually not necessary unless you have extra tissue or structures that you scan that you don't need that might throw off the software. Next, the software is going to attempt to place 4 points to align the mandible to this occlusal table. Sometimes it either doesn't align it or doesn't align it properly, in which case you can detach the data and it will show you the arch here next to the occlusal table. So what you need to do is place 4 points and in a symmetrical fashion on the arch. The best place we found is the distal buccal cusp tips of the lower first molars and the buccal cusp tips of the first bicuspids. But if those teeth are not present, you can choose for example, mesobuccal cusp tips of the 7s or the 5s or the canines. Just try to keep it symmetrical so that it will place this in a symmetrical position within this occlusal plane here. Next, it's going to attempt to identify, segment, and number the teeth. Our job in this next stage is to make sure it's done that correctly and clean up anything that wasn't done correctly. So here you can see that the numbers, I've got this set for orthodontic numbering. So I have 16, 26, 25, 15. The numbers in the upper appear to be correct, and I can see that the colors are symmetrical, left versus right, and that also helps me that the incisors, the 2 central incisors are slightly different colors, but all the rest are symmetrical left to right. So the numbers appear to be correct, but there's some areas where it didn't paint the tooth correctly, it didn't segment it correctly. So I click on the 1-5 and click edit. I can go and erase it with a little erase tool, but the easiest way is to just deselect the whole tooth and then use this tooth finding wizard and just double click on the tooth again, and it usually identifies it correctly. So here on this 1-3, I can click on the 1-3, clear everything, double click the tooth, and it will bring that up. If I can see an area like on this 1-4 where maybe it didn't pick up the whole tooth, I can click on that and identify a little bit more of the tooth structure. So this all appears to be identified correctly. Okay, so the upper arch looks good, so I can confirm that down here. Now in the lower, sometimes a tooth number will be incorrect. So if, for example, a tooth number is incorrect, you can click on the tooth number and change it to the correct tooth number, but it appears to have all the tooth numbers correct here. But I still need to clean up some of the paint. See, and that now is not what I want, so I can go and undo that. If I want to add a little bit more to that tooth, I can just go paint it manually. This tooth right here, the 7, we're going to need to fix that. So what I can do is erase all of that and click the tooth finding wizard and just kind of keep clicking different areas till it finds it. You can see that's not what I want. It's going to have a hard time here because it's not real well defined on this distal margin here. So I can keep trying to see if I can get it. That's a little bit better. And that's not good. So at this point, I can use the little paintbrush to just finish painting in this area. Generally, this looks good down here. Now here, it didn't locate that tooth at all because it has some tissue over it. So then what I do is go over to the left side of the screen and I click on the tooth that's grayed out, the 3-7. And I have options here. I can say that it's unerupted tooth, which if I say it's unerupted, it's going to take this 4-7. If it's there, it will duplicate that and put it over here. If there is no tooth on the other side of the arch, it will just take a tooth out of a tooth library and put it in that position. If I want to clear what I've done there, that's going to be right here. It says cancel. That's a right click to cancel that. Because I can also go and find that tooth. And if I go and identify this part of it, then it's just going to use that part of the tooth in the simulation. If I do have a missing tooth, say for example, the 1-4 is missing, I can go and erase all of that tooth. Let's say that one's missing and I'm thinking about doing a restoration there. Then what I would do is click here, planned prosthesis. And if there's a tooth available on the other side, it will duplicate that and put it in the area where I want to put a restoration. Or if I want to put a crown on a worn out tooth, you know, for say these front teeth were real worn down and I wanted to put restorations on those teeth, we could put planned prosthesis on those teeth as well. Okay, but I'm going to clear that. And I'm going to go ahead and clear this as well. But you can see I have some other options here, planned prosthesis, unerupted tooth, or find the tooth. We'll go back and find that tooth. Other options that I have here is, say, for example, planned extraction. Now, if you're thinking, normally we don't click planned extraction unless we're actually going to say, hey, that tooth is definitely going to be extracted. If it's just a treatment option that we might consider extracting bicuspids, we'll wait and look at that later on. I wouldn't say planned extraction at this stage. But if there's a primary tooth, you can click primary tooth, identify that as a primary tooth, and it will replace that primary tooth with an adult tooth. Again, if it's present on the opposite side of the arch, it will put it in place of the primary tooth. Or if they're both primary teeth, it will take a tooth out of library, an adult tooth, and put it in there. When we identify a tooth as a primary tooth, that stuff is this is a growing patient. And if we want to identify it as a growing patient, then the simulation is going to show some extra advancement of the mandibular dentition to simulate the differential growth between the maxilla and the mandible. But you don't have to turn that on. You could turn that off if you want to. Okay, and I'm not going to clear that because that's not a primary tooth. Another option that I have on these teeth is to pin a tooth. So say I have an existing implant, if I pin that tooth, then it will not move that tooth in the simulation. So those are the different features that we have on this tooth identification tab. But once we've properly identified the teeth and numbered them, then we click on to the next stage. And again, if we've uploaded a lateral ceph, it's going to trace that automatically for us. If we don't have a lateral ceph, then this step is skipped. Okay, and we can go ahead and move on if we want to, or if we want to make any changes here, we can go in and we can make changes. The red points are key points that are being used in calculating data for the simulation. The green points are just points that are being used to make it look nice, okay, that are tracing the outlines of the different structures. Okay, but A point, B point, the tips of the incisal edges, the tips of the molars, where they intersect on the occlusal plane, gnathion, condylion, these points are being used in calculating data. Okay, so once we're happy with that, we can move on to the next stage, and it will attempt to orient your three-dimensional scan data onto this two-dimensional picture here. Sometimes it does it well, but sometimes we need to help it. If we don't like the way that it has oriented those, we can detach the data. And here it's going to give us a red point and a green point that we can place on the model, and then try to find those same 2 points on the lateral ceph. Whatever points you can easily identify on both the model and the image, and then it will calibrate using those points. So here I'm going to put a red point on the tip of the incisal edge. You notice that the model turns blue when I'm in a position that will allow me to place that point. So I'm going to place it right there on the tip of the incisal edge, and then come over to the image and place it in the same spot. And then I'm going to go replace it where that green point, where the distal buccal cusp of that upper first molar comes in contact with the lower, somewhere around there. And you can see then again that it's recalibrated those. And you can see over here, I can turn off the upper and look at the lower, vice versa. So if I wanted to adjust that a little bit, I could grab it here and rotate it a little bit. Okay, but that is trying to orient and calibrate the three-dimensional data to the two-dimensional image. And then you can see it gives us this little light system down here. And I've got 2 green lights here. Okay, so the Wits measurement, if I have questions about that, it can show me the details here. The Wits appraisal, okay, that's showing me the skeletal anterior-posterior relationship. So here I'm within the green area, which tells me that this is a skeletal class 1. I don't have a big discrepancy between the anterior-posterior positioning of the upper and lower mandible. But if it was a class 2 skeletal or a class 3 skeletal, you would see that show up as yellow or red depending on the severity here. The McGann angle is being formed from the point on the condylion to a point to a point at gnathion, and that's being used in the growth calculations, but it's also being used in the McGann angle, which in this simplified ceph is being used to give us the vertical dimension of the skeletal. So again, here we're green, which tells us that this patient is skeletal average. So they're not high angle or low angle, not skeletal deep or open. This is an average skeletal dimension. And if this patient was high angle or low angle or skeletal open or deep, you would see this in the yellow or red depending on the severity. So that's a nice way to just be able to see the simplicity or complexity of a case as you go through very quickly. On this next tab up here, and by the way, you can go back to these tabs by clicking up here, or you can advance through with the little next button on the bottom. Here it gives us arch forms to choose from. It will always default to the medium ovoid arch form because that seems to fit most arches, but we want to pick an arch form that would maintain this patient's arch form. Okay, so not an expanded. You can see that this would be an expanded arch form. Okay, we're looking for one that's going to maintain that arch form. So something that kind of would lie right around somewhere along the buccal surfaces of these teeth. Okay, not out on the soft tissue and definitely not on the cusp tips or on the occlusal surface. Okay, so we'll choose the medium ovoid in the lower, and you can see that if I right click here on the back of this, I can orient this so it looks symmetrical on this arch. Up here in the front, I could shift it left to right. You can see that little notch in the mandible. And if I place that gray line right on that notch and then right click in the back, as I use different people's computers, everybody's mouse is set up a little bit different. So just keep in mind if your mouse has got a different click, if it's a right or a left, this software will use a right click or a left click or a double click. Sometimes it's right and left to do what you want to do. But I highly recommend that you use a mouse rather than trying to just use a trackpad as you're using the software. These dotted lines up in the front, are just supposed to give us a reference point so that we're not too far back from the buccal surface of those teeth or too far forward. So we want that dotted line to be kind of resting along the buccal surface of the most forward teeth in the arch. Something like that. Okay, and then in the upper, same thing. If you've scanned the palate, you can easily see that mid-palatal suture, and so that helps us sometimes to align that. But you could also look at the teeth, kind of look at where the arch form is touching the canines, where it's touching the bicuspids and the molars, and just try to make that look symmetrical on that arch form. Okay, again, the forward and back is not that critical here, but we just kind of want that somewhere along the buccal surface of those teeth. All right, so something like that for this case. And then we'll click next. Here, the software is going to attempt to identify the bite classification by using the buccal groove of the lower first molar. Okay, so you want to make sure that it's properly identified, that buccal groove of the lower first molar, and then the buccal cusp tip, the mesial buccal cusp tip of the upper first molar. Okay, so you want to make sure that those have been properly identified. And if those teeth are missing, you could use a canine relationship, you could use bicuspid relationship. So if I was going to use a canine relationship, I could put this marker right on the cusp tip of the canine and where that cusp tip should fall between those two teeth on the lower. Okay, or I could even use a bicuspid. So this cusp tip should fall somewhere in that area. Okay, but if those first molars are present, it's going to try to use that buccal groove of the lower first molar and the mesial buccal cusp tip of the upper first molar. And you can see that that says that this is a class 2 and that this actually is a slightly more challenging classification because we do have a little bit more class 2 than what just might be corrected with just real simple class 2 elastics. Might take a little bit more class 2 elastics or some other appliance. Here, you see a traffic light, green, yellow, red, kind of showing you where you're at and the difficulty. And, we're just barely over 2 on this, so we're close to green, but just barely into yellow on the difficulty of this case here. And then it will take all this data and give us some simulations. And when it produces the simulations, we'll be able to see the original data on the left, and we'll see a simulation on the right. It's always going to default to simulation 1.1. So even though this was a class 2 case, it's first just going to show me what would happen if we just do simple alignment only, non-extraction, alignment only, maintaining the arch form. So you can see that the class 2 that's in the canine and the bicuspids is still present. That hasn't been corrected, so there's excess overjet. So let me show you, here's a little tool that's an animation tool. So if I click on that tool and slide back and forth, all this is showing me is alignment onto that occlusal plane that we set. But in the anterior-posterior dimension, there's been no correction. Okay, again, because it's just going to first show me what alignment only would look like, which I find helpful because it's always pretty straightforward to align teeth. It's more challenging to get the bite classification done. So this would show me that, after initial leveling and aligning of the teeth, this is the bite correction that I have to make in order to get this case completed. All right. And it's showing us here another little light for this simulation. This is a new light. This is a incisor advancement light. Okay. And so with the incisor advancement for this case, it's showing me that that's not a lot of incisor advancement just to level and align the teeth because there wasn't a lot of crowding. So if we look just at that lower arch, you can see it as it aligns those teeth to the arch form that we selected. It's not a lot of advancement. Here's a superimpose tool that we can use, and you can see again, that's not a lot of advancement from start to finish. You can even see that overlaid onto a lateral ceph. So there was the starting position of the teeth. There's the final position. So it's giving us a kind of a green light for that amount of advancement for this case. I'm going to click here to remove that. But then if I want to compare a class 2 correction, you can see here that lower midline is not lined to the upper because I have varying amounts of class 2. There's more class 2 on the left side for this patient than on the right side. So if I want to compare to, let's say, a class 2 elastic plan, if I click here, I can look at whatever I want on the left or the right. I can keep the left as the original data, or I can go choose something different on either side. So let's look at our choices here. We have a non-extraction, maintain the arch form class 2 elastic plan. So if I click that one, you can see it's now corrected to a class 1 occlusion on the right and left side. Now the overjet is proper. Okay, so there's the class 2 correction on that side. But now I'm getting, on this side, a red light for the amount of advancement. Okay, so when I align the crowding and advance the teeth for a class 2 correction, let me show you that on the animation tool here. I'm going to minimize these two screens and then choose the animation tool so you can see what's happening. So here you can see that on the right side, all we're getting is just alignment, but on the left side, we're getting alignment plus the class 2 bite correction. Okay, so if I look at the superimpose tool from the occlusal view, you can see now the difference here between the amount of advancement when you've corrected the class 2 versus the amount of advancement here with just alignment. And that's a significant amount of advancement. There may be a significant amount of skeletal resistance to that amount of change. So looking at that on the Ceph overlay, you can see here that this is not real far from the starting position, but this is extremely far from the starting position. That would not be appropriate to try to move the teeth non-surgically that far forward because the bone is not going to support that position. So this would not be a good option. So what other options do I have? Well, I could try an expanded arch form. So class 3 elastics with an expanded arch form. Let's look at that first. So with just an expanded arch form, it does limit the amount of advancement in the lower, but let's compare that on the right side to a class 2 elastic plan with expansion and with some IPR. This is putting a set amount of IPR in the anterior teeth. It's 0.3 millimeters per contact in the anterior. So just kind of a moderate amount of IPR. And now we can see the difference in the amount of advancement from start to finish for these two different options on the Ceph overlay. And then if we go back and look here in this simulation with the IPR and the expansion and the class 2 correction, we're getting a green light because we're not advancing real far away from the start position. And here, even though they look the same, we're getting a yellow light. So if I show you the simulation tool, you can see different amounts of advancement. And you can understand that better when you look from the occlusal view and we turn on the superimposition tool. See the differing amounts of advancement here? Why is that? That's because in both of them, we are expanding the arches and correcting the class 2. But over here on the right, we're also adding IPR to limit the advancement, whereas here we're just expanding and correcting the class 2. So I might decide in this case that I want to go with this simulation right here, simulation 2.3. But I do have other options as well. Let's see what else is over here. We have upper distalization. So maybe we correct the class 2 with some upper distalization instead of advancing the lowers. And see, that gives us a yellow because here we are doing some upper distalization, some lower mesialization, so kind of meeting halfway. And so that would be another option. We also have an extraction plan with different amounts of anchorage, a minimum anchorage, moderate anchorage, maximum anchorage. So if I was to consider an extraction plan, you go, well, that's probably too much retraction for this patient. I don't think we probably need to extract this patient's teeth. But again, if I look at the simulation, this little animation tool. Now this is not aligner staging. This is just simply a straight animation from starting position to final position. Okay, but here you can see the extraction plan versus the non-extraction plan. So again, after looking at all my different options, I am going to choose this Class 2 elastic plan with IPR and expansion. Let me show you what happens with this distalization plan over here. But regardless, for each, whether it's a Class 1 case or a Class 2 case or a Class 3 case, you're going to get a set of options, somewhere between probably 5 and 9 different treatment options that you can look at based upon the data that was put in along the way. Different data sets will give different treatment plans available here. Okay, so with this distalization plan, you can see here that the upper is moving back and the lower is moving forward over on this left side. Whereas over on the right side, all you're getting is lowers moving forward. You can watch that too in the simulations when you see it in superimpose. If you watch the upper molars back there, you can see that on the right side, the molars are distalizing from the start position. And if you were going to do this with aligners, obviously that would be done with sequential distalization staging. Okay, but here you're just seeing a straight linear movement from the start to final position just to visualize the changes taking place. All right, so let's go ahead and select this 2.3 plan. So I've moved the check mark over to this side. And then we can move on from that point and say aligners or brackets. Okay, if I choose brackets, then it's going to show me the bracket torque and the rotations and the arch wire. Remember, I chose an expanded plan, so it's giving me a non-extraction ovoid 1 wire. And if I were to complete that and click here, complete, it's going to close this and it's going to take me to SmileStream. If you don't have a SmileStream account, you can sign up for one for free at smilestream.com. But if you do have a SmileStream account and you're logged in, it will take you there. If not, it'll take you to the login page. And when you log in, it will create a patient for this patient's name, and it will put this data into the appliance tab so that you can order the brackets and the wires for doing the case. And if you click on this treatment plan, it will take you to a web browser and give you a step-by-step treatment plan for treating this case with brackets. Going back though, the way that it's programmed right now for aligners, there will be a different integration at some point here, but for right now, if we do choose aligners, what it does is it asks us to enter the patient information here. So let's put some data in here. Okay, and if we click save, it's going to attach this data and tell us that your order form has been saved, but you have to exit this program and then place your order to the Progressive Aligners lab in Medit. Okay, so I'll show you that in a minute. But one thing I'd like to show you before we leave this is sometimes when this comes through, due to the way the scan was done or the shape of the patient's teeth, sometimes it will misinterpret the anatomy of a tooth. So if you have a tooth that comes in and it's not aligned properly, and you would like to see that aligned properly in the simulation, then this little tool that's called tooth orientation is down here at the bottom. And if we click that, it allows us to go back and help the program identify the correct orientation of that tooth, and it will realign it in the simulation. If you have either this animation tool on or the superimpose tool on where that little slider is down on the bottom, then you won't be able to see the tooth orientation button. So you have to turn that off, and then that little button will come back. So tooth orientation will take us into a mode here where we have the option of correcting the way that it's interpreting the rotation. So this is for rotation, this is for angulation, and then this last one is for inclination. Okay, so for example, if it didn't rotate one of the teeth properly, let's pick a tooth. Let's say this one right here. Maybe we don't like the way that it rotated that tooth in the simulation. I can click that and come over here and say, actually the tooth is more like that. I'd like to see that corrected. In the inclination, take that canine, for example. When you click on it, it brings it up over here. And you can say, you know, actually that tooth should be oriented more like this. Or this molar, for example, more like that. Sometimes these upper incisors or low incisors will be aligned where there's a gap right here, and you might need to go in there and again, just change the orientation of that tooth. And then when you go back and click, and you can do multiple teeth at a time, you don't have to do one tooth at a time. But anything that you change while you're in this mode, say for example, you have a tooth where the torque doesn't look right, then you can go in here and you can change the long axis of that tooth. Okay, but any one of those things that needs to be changed, once you change it and you click confirm, it'll re-prepare the simulation for you with that correction. So just to show you then, if we did decide that we wanted to order progressive aligners on this case, then I'm going to close this. I'll exit the program after saving. And we'll go back to Medit link. And now there's going to be a new attachment here. That's what these attachments are here, this untitled. This is the case, well here, this is the case that was just created. And this right here is the form for ordering the aligner. Okay, so the process for ordering the aligner is you need to come over here to click form. Down at the bottom, you can either choose tooth or arch. It will normally come in on tooth, but you need for aligners to look at, because you know your options for teeth are more like a crown or an inlay or an onlay, but we're treating a whole arch. So we're going to click the maxilla and say that in the maxilla we want clear aligner, and mandible we want clear aligner. So now we have a clear aligner for maxilla and mandible. And then we click save. Then we come up here and click order. Okay, and it says I don't have any partners. Okay, I need to send this order somewhere, so we're going to search for partners. And so what I need to do here, close this. What we need to do here is enter progressive aligners. And you can see here, progressive aligners. If I click that, it says lab information. Should be, oh, I've already requested this. That's why all it says is cancel request. It should say here, request partnership. So if you click that, then it will send a request to Progressive Aligners, which they will approve, and then you'll be able to send that through. Make sure that if you are going to order the case through Medit, rather than going directly to the Progressive Aligner website, make sure that when you send that case through, that you uploaded all of the data that we need, the pano, the Ceph, the photos. Make sure that that's all been uploaded so that that gets included when you send that through. Okay, so again, it was form, select arch, select mandible and maxilla, clear aligner, and then click order. And if you haven't established that relationship yet with Progressive Lab, you'll need to search for Progressive Aligners and create a relationship, and then from there you'll be able to submit the case. All right, you can always reach out to us at Progressive Orthodontic Seminars with any questions or concerns that you have. Thank you so much for joining. I know that you're going to enjoy using this app, and we look forward to working together with you.